on gut microbes again. This is the second, and presumably the last, video chapter in my microbial series, and this is the paper I'll be talking about in this segment. Being as it covers the same topic as my last one, the same general subject, it would seem reasonable to assume that the introduction for that one, all the Lynn Margulis stuff, would suffice for this one as well, and I could just go straight into the findings of the paper. If in your analyses, though, in your prediction equation, you control for the fanaticism of the presenter, you sort of have to expect another round of introductions, which begins with this. Your body, meaning everything you think of as you, is composed of about 10 trillion cells, give or take. Probably give or take a lot. Maybe give or take none, nobody knows. But 10 trillion seems to be the accepted estimate. When estimating how many microorganisms you have all up in your insides, just living in your intestines, your gut flora, you have to multiply that number by about 10. However many cells of you have about 10 times that many microbes, like E. coli, swarming around inside of you. Just E. coli alone, you have about a billion of, festering in your colon, producing vitamin K. That is, unless you're currently grappling with some gastroenteritis, then you might have a bit more. The point is, if you do a biological roll call, the head count of bacteria outnumbers the cell count of you. In terms of volume, it's not quite the case. You only have a couple kilos worth of flora inside of you, maybe a 2-liter of Coke. Now, this would be a lot if that were powdered Coke. If you were a mule running 2 kilos of Coke from Tijuana to San Diego, that would be a serious fortune. The fortune of your flora plays out in other ways, and in sheer numbers, it's got you beat. This contrast is especially clear genetically. However many functional genes you have, those that contribute to the creation and the operation of you have to multiply that number by about 100 to estimate the number of genes contributing to the function of your flora. Richard Dawkins had a great line about this, which he published during my senior year of high school. Each one of us is a city of cells, and each cell a town of bacteria. You are a giant megalopolis of bacteria. Now, all these bacteria might not be us in the way that we think of ourselves. We think of our fingers as a part of us because we have proprioception. We can feel them and feel in control of them. With gut flora, we don't feel that same connectedness. But if you started to regard these bacterial residents, our inner tenants, as unwelcome squatters, and in playing the role of a biological landlord, tried to rid your estate of them, purge the property, empty out your megalopolis of its squatters, you'd wind up with some fairly serious problems. You can lose parts of your body that you identify with, and largely be okay. The Yakuza could break into your house while you're sleeping and slice off a couple fingers as penalty for unpaid gambling debts, and your life would hardly be changed, save for a kind of ugly hand that you'd have to look at for the rest of your life. Even if you were a musician, you'd probably be fine. I say this weighted by the evidence of Django Reinhardt, the old Belgian gypsy. He singed his hand into a melty hunk of garbage in a caravan fire and went on to become one of the best guitar players ever. So you can lose parts of your body you identify with without too much in the way of consequence. But if the intestinal equivalent of the Yakuza slipped into your body like the magic school bus and started exterminating bacteria, just a mass execution of your flora, some sort of systematic floricide, you'd be in trouble. That trouble would start on the toilet and end in the coffin. To help me illustrate these troubles for a second time, here's the article I promised a couple minutes ago. This one is much more methodological than the previous one. That one was a review. This one actually did stuff. So I'm going to spend some time illustrating what they did, and I promise I'll keep it interesting, so don't start clicking your way ahead. We'll begin with the overall purpose of the study. The first function was to genetically profile the gut flora. The majority of the microbes inside of us had yet to be characterized. You know how people say we only know about a few % of the species that live in the oceans? The rest have yet to be discovered. Our bodies are a bit like that, and our intestines are like the Mariana Trench of our bodies. This paper is describing one of the best attempts to date at attacking that ignorance, at remedying that lack of information, at figuring out the microbial genome, the microbiome, the microbiome. And I have to say, I have a problem with the ohm used to describe everything now. Genome, microbiome, proteome, metabolome, so on and on and on and on. Ohm was stolen from OMA in the 19th century. OMA is cancer. We're referring to fields of study as cancers and pretending it doesn't mean cancer. This is really stupid. But criticism aside, that's the first function of the study. The second function was to establish the human metagenome, which is pretty much the same goal as the first one, just phrased differently. What Dawkins referred to as a megalopolis, these authors refer to as a supraorganism, an entire ensemble of genomes. Put them all together, and you get the human metagenome. To continue my diatribe on word choices, the word meta technically means after. Metaphysics was the book Aristotle wrote after his book Physics. It was just a chronological title. It had a subsequent publication date. It came later in the calendar. But instead of interpreting it as a sequentially derived title, everyone interpreted metaphysics as thoughts beyond the purview of physics, beyond the scope of what a physicist can imagine. Now you could do a Google search today and get images like this. It's rendered the word meta totally meaningless. It can be used to mean pretty much anything. God, the 76ers just got meta'd all over the court tonight. That's not as near to nonsense as it should be. But in this sense, the authors mean beyond the human, the whole summation of genomes that constitute a functional person. So that's what the authors are trying to characterize in their metagenome. And then lastly, for their final purpose, they were pursuing an application of this information, trying to identify some potential therapies. Once we figure out phenotypic properties based on these genes, does that give us something to say about the possible microbial treatments? So those are the goals. And this isn't the only pursuit of those goals. This is a partial glance at the playing field, just the all-star roster, the big players, no farm leagues on this slide. And this particular paper comes off of the project at the bottom, the MetaHit project. And what they did is gather up a bunch of Danes and Spaniards, 124 in all, more Dane than Spaniard. And then they got them all to poop. And then they scooped up that hulking bulk of poop and sequenced the DNA inside of it. Individually, they didn't do the whole tumbrel of it all in one shot. But they sequenced the DNA in all the poop they could get their hands on. This yielded a lot of genes. About 150 times as many exist in the human genome. I emphasize the as a reminder that there's no such thing as a human genome. Millions of genes, though, just endless strings of genes. Though most people's guts don't contain all of them. I'm feeling really compelled to make a Pokemon reference here. There's a slogan that appears on every form of advertising, the Pokemon equivalent of just do it. It appears on every commercial, every poster, every piece of thing. It's gotta catch 'em all. This slogan is so central to the concept that the protagonist's name is Ash Ketchum. And apparently a Pokemaster as good as Ash catches all of the Pokemon. I don't think anyone is a good enough Pokemaster with the microbiome to have caught all of them, to have every single one of these millions of microbial genes inside of their digestive tract. If anyone has, it's probably me. I'm certainly among the world's leading Pokemasters when it comes to bacterial enslavement. I haven't washed my dishes in over a decade. You'd be as astonished as you are sickened by the rainbows of bacteria that cover them. Photos don't quite suffice, but obviously if my bowl looks like this, I'm not a finicky hand washer. Excluding the shower, my hands don't usually get wet unless it's raining, or if I have to shake someone's hand at the gym. As something between a formality and a courtesy, I'll wash my hands before preparing food for other people. Or if I sneak up on you while you're sleeping and rub my fingers around in your mouth, I'll wash my hands first. But I'll probably air dry them because I can't find a towel, so they'll be wet when they go into your mouth. The point of saying this is that my lack of immunological hygiene has, I think, been a healthy practice. When the power goes out and my food spoils, I don't care. I ate a bunch of shrimp whose rot you could smell before even opening the package. The freezer had been out for weeks. Not even a little discomfort. My stomach never disagreed with it. To afford those shrimp, I work with drug addicts. A surprising number of them sleep on sidewalks or in shelters on what they refer to as boats. They come in with sicknesses I've never even heard of. The worst symptom I've ever gotten from any of them was a stuffy nose. Not even stuffy, just the kind of nose that burns like an STD when you breathe. I woke up one morning with VD nose. It was gone by the time I went to bed that same night. One of my coworkers, who had the same exposure, was hospitalized for 3 days. I'm pretty sure at this point you could give me a transfusion and put the wrong blood type in me and I'd be fine. Now, am I still going to die of cancer? Probably. I can't hope to inoculate myself against all forms of death and disease just by catching a couple extra Pokemon with a pair of filthy hands. Even the best Pokemasters have to retire their Pokeballs at some point. That's Elton's circle of life. But I feel like my mid-circled life has profited from its general lack of hygiene. With a sample size of 1 and no evidence of causation, I attribute this to the Pokemon I've collected while on my quest to catch them all. But the average person, who is much more hygienic than I, isn't going to have all these millions of bacterial genes inside of them. Despite this, the researchers did plug in every single gene they found into their microbial gene catalog. And once they had this catalog established, they developed some tools to profile it. In doing so, they found about 19,000 functional clusters of genes, of which 5,000 of those clusters, each containing at least 20 genes, had not been previously identified, so they sort of discovered these. I realize talk of functional clusters is practically meaningless without providing some sort of interesting context, so here's your context. These cluster counts equate to at least 170 species of bacteria taking up residence in each individual person, and a little over 1,000 species of microbial tenants in all the gut districts combined. This implies 2 things. 1, there's a lot of sharing going on. If there wasn't, and each person had 170 species of bacteria inside of them, it wouldn't take 124 Danes and Spaniards to reach that 1,000. And 2, there's a lot of diversity. As far as the sharing goes, the authors estimated that about half of the genes found in each person's poop heap are shared with at least half of everyone else's poop heaps, and 57 of the microbial species were present in more than 90% of the people. The most widely shared genes they refer to as common genes, and these constitute about 10% of the catalog. Now, the authors don't make this next point, but the inverse can be inferred. If there's an overpass, there's an underpass. Anatomically, if there's a brevis, there's a longus. And here, if 10% of the catalog is common, 90% must be loosely thought of as uncommon, which implies plenty of inter-individual diversity. At the base, though, there are about 6,000 clusters of microbial DNA that exist in everyone. Maybe there's an outlier here or there, but who cares? Only the inliers matter. And among the inliers, these genes appear in everyone. And they refer to the collection of them as the minimal metagenome, and suspect it's critical to normal bodily functioning. A lot of the immune system stuff we talked about in the previous video chapter happens here. Plus synthesis of amino and fatty acids and vitamins and a bunch of other metabolic implications. Changes to genetic expression, inflammatory cascades, all sorts of stuff. And perhaps these things don't just happen here, but these seem to be the most critical bacteria. Altogether, they estimated about 1,200 functions to be carried out by these microbes. Although most of them are specific to themselves, to the gut ecosystem, so they only impact you indirectly. But this wraps up what the paper had actually revealed and accomplished. Once they had finished describing all of this stuff, they proposed some ways in which their gene catalog could be useful. The authors don't make this next point, so blame me if you disagree, but most areas of research, especially in my field, are redundant to the point of being totally worthless. Grant funding has just become a system of welfare for middle-class professors with some free time and no ideas. And that lack of ideas never stops them. Why? Because research is incentivized by the university system. If a professor doesn't publish, he's out of a job. So he just does the same exact thing over and over, changing some tiny variable a tiny bit in order to counterfeit novelty. Practically all of them do this until the day they retire, at which point each one of them looks over his shoulder at a wasted career with a nod of satisfaction. If anything has ever really baffled me, maintenance of self-esteem among the researching class is a good candidate. But that's not the point I'm making. The point is, the majority of the research that gets funded and published is an over-exploration of old ideas. We're just re-accessing minds that have already been hollowed out of their gems. People should be much more depressed by this than they are. Here, though, with the microbiome, we have what's potentially an incredibly valuable resource, and all we've really done is build the mine shaft. Granted, I'm sure the shaft builders are in there right now chipping away at the walls, but they haven't started emerging with wheelbarrows of jewels yet, so there's potential excitement on its way. These exciting jewels obviously being therapeutic interventions, new ways to optimize the health of the human through the health of the community inside of it. Give your megalopolis a tax plan that results in some thriving local economies, and you'll have some balanced budgets at the top. And this should excite the pharmaceutical industry as well, as the manipulation of the gut flora could be a huge component in the health and flourishing of its host. The authors of the paper I presented in my first video chapter refer to this sort of pursuit as a bugs to drugs program. Before we even approach this point, though, we have a fair amount of mining to do. And I don't think anyone will make the mistake this time around in this omic field in overestimating the speed of discovery. Though I do have to qualify that point by saying that I detest people who make fun of Francis Collins for his ambitious expectations regarding the sequencing of the human genome. Francis Collins is the physician combo geneticist who oversaw the Human Genome Project. He's one of the most important scientists alive, and all anyone seems to know about him is that he overestimated something's speed. He delivered the human genome under budget, ahead of schedule, and then anticipated that the subsequent discoveries would start pouring in a bit faster than they did. When the pace of these discoveries ended up a bit sluggish, they weren't racing in as quickly as he'd predicted, Collins became a punchline. And who were his hecklers? Only the professors who have been publishing the same paper over and over for decades. Is there anything sadder than that? Yes, there's a lot. There's a lot that's sadder than that, but that's pretty sad too. What's beside the point? The main point, what's most important in all of this, is that we have a huge reservoir of information that's recently become available. But we have to appreciate, based on past experiences, that it's going to take a while to empty this reservoir in the direction of human health and well-being.
CourtneyJensen.com